Hey, Julia Barzyk here from Wise Investigator. Today I'm going to talk to you about the 7 habits of highly effective PIs or highly funded PIs. And this is based on the work of Stephen Covey. So you may be familiar with the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is very, very famous, and it was published first back in 1989. And it's really one of the best known books on personal and professional development. There have been a ton of spin-offs like 7 Habits for Highly Effective Teens and for families. And the edition that I have here, it says that over 40 million copies have been sold. So now this book is over 400 pages. So I'm not suggesting that you need to go out and read this entire book. Certainly if you're interested, pick it up and have a look. But because it's so famous and been around for a very long time, there are actually plenty of summaries and other resources based off of this book that you very well may want to check out to spend a little bit of less time and learn more about this work. So what I'm going to talk about is the 7 habits in terms of the funding process. So let's get into the 7 habits. Now, the 7 habits are based off of a paradigm, and I'll introduce that very, very briefly here. But the idea that Stephen Covey presents is that we want to enter into the actions associated with all of these habits with a mindset of there being enough resources and enough opportunities. So it's really coming from a place of abundance, not scarcity, not ultra competitive. We want to think collaboratively. We want to think that there's enough resources and opportunities for all of us, not really competitively, and not thinking that, for us to gain something, somebody else has to lose. So that's the overlying paradigm upon which these 7 habits are built. And also wanted to point out that his definition of success is one that's unique to that individual, and it's broad. So it's what success means to you. And career and financial success would probably be part of that for most people, but it's certainly not everything. So let's just get that out on the table before we get into these. All right, so the 7 habits are: 1, be proactive; 2, begin with the end in mind; 3, put first things first; 4, think win-win; 5, seek first to understand and then to be understood; 6, synergize; and 7, sharpen the saw. So now the first 3 habits, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and put first things first, are the personal or private victory associated habits that have to do with our own personal management, management of the self. And the next 3, think win-win, seek first to understand and then to be understood, and synergize, are the public-facing habits, or the habits that have to do with how we interact with others and the outside world. All right, so the first one of Stephen Covey's habits is be proactive. So what we're talking about here is taking initiative and acting first, and taking responsibility for what the situation is, what our situation is. And that isn't to say that, some people's situation isn't difficult, or that some people may have outside influences affecting them differently than other people, or even a more challenging situation. It's really to focus on how we are thinking about the environment and the situation that we are creating, and taking responsibility for that. So that's how he lays out that habit. Now, importantly, how does this relate to funding? First off, this might sound a little abstract or a little basic, but it's important to get it out here. And that is that the first thing here is to realize that getting funded is your responsibility. So again, this may sound a little vague or maybe kind of big, but this is something that many PIs, I believe, kind of skip over. It doesn't really ever cross their mind to have that realization that the funding is not expected to flow to them through any outside forces, but rather the process of getting funded is something that they will need to initiate and follow through on. and that in the system that we have set up here, university research within the United States, that the research funding process is led by the PI and it is their responsibility. There's not a lottery for funding or any kind of guaranteed funding except for something like startup funds. So that's the first stage of being proactive, is really to have that realization that this proactivity, I should say, is what's going to be required. It's not a nice to have. So very important to be proactive in the building the relationships, especially with mission-driven funders. So these are relationships that can lead to funding opportunities where your likelihood of getting funded or a proposal acceptance rate can be much higher than in, say, one-off type opportunities or applications, which can be very, very competitive, especially for a lot of the early career awards. So being proactive in building the relationships is what is going to set you up to have success with funding in those organizations. They generally don't have the same kind of very, very open calls that you may see for early career type opportunities. And for that reason, you have to be proactive in seeking out the right fit opportunity rather than looking at a calendar, looking at some deadlines, looking at a very broad description of an opportunity and thinking more passively that you can just go for that and put your best effort forward with a proposal or with that application and have a good chance of success. And that could be a great way to go about pursuing those opportunities. But broadly, for the relationship building will require you to be proactive. People generally just won't reach out to you. You're going to need to reach out to them when you're a junior person and people don't know your work yet. Now, being proactive is also very important in making the contacts. So not only do you want to think broadly about relationship building and nurturing the relationships that you have, being on the lookout to make new relationships, but very specifically, you will need to be contacting people through email, at conferences, through different connections that you may have, including on LinkedIn. And that's something that, again, is a proactive effort initiated by the PI. Another way that I would encourage PIs to be proactive is when you need to take a different approach. So I do hear from a lot of PIs who are submitting proposal after proposal, and unfortunately they're being declined. And if this is something that you're experiencing, I would say rather than writing yet another proposal or relying on maybe just some very general guidance about a resubmission, to be proactive in coming up with a new strategy to get a different outcome. Begin with the end in mind is the second habit from Stephen Covey. Now, this is a critically important habit for the funding process, and it relates to things at a high level and also at a pretty granular level. So starting out at the high level, let's think about your vision for your career. It's really kind of a broad vision for what you plan to do with your career, and that even really gets into what you plan to do with your life. So this is pretty big stuff. But the reason why this is so important to think about the end in mind when you're going about everything that you do related to career, and you could say again, your vision for where you want to see it going, is that everything that you put out there, for example, on your LinkedIn profile, on your webpage, in all of the media that you put out and all of the communications, including papers that you publish, you want to be communicating something that's consistent with your vision so that other people can understand what you're all about. And most importantly, you can understand how all of these different activities that you're engaged in are supporting your longer term vision, largely so that you can make sure you stay on track with saying yes to the right opportunities and saying no to the opportunities that aren't supporting your vision. You can also and should revisit the vision periodically to see if how you're doing in terms of working towards what you want and in terms of making sure that you're saying, again, yes to the right opportunities and no to those that aren't supporting you and your vision. So, of course, when I'm talking about opportunities, that includes the funding opportunities. Are you looking and working towards opportunities that support that vision rather than just taking a haphazard approach or a shot in the dark type thing? Like, oh, these keywords look like they fit, so I'm just going to throw something in here. I don't really know if the vision of this organization is aligned with mine, or I don't know the bigger picture of how this fits into what I want to do. But again, the keywords match up, so I'll just throw something over here and see if it sticks. That's not the best way to go about it. Beginning with the end in mind is the better way. And again, aligning where you put your time and effort into something with your vision, aligned with your vision, right? So another way to think about this in terms of getting yourself to that next stage is to think about the people that are ahead of you in their career or in life. Maybe they're older and they're at a different life stage in terms of their family and overall situation. Maybe they're ahead of you in terms of what they've accomplished in their career. And be aware of the opportunity that you have to look at how they've managed things. How are they managing their online presence? How are they managing what they decide to publish and how they go about achieving the things that they've achieved? Not so that you would copy what they do, but because that can give you some clues or some insight or some ideas as to how you may be able to take similar approaches to achieve something similar that's still yet your own. So look ahead to others too in terms of creating your vision. Now, coming to a more granular level, when you're doing your research, absolutely begin with the end in mind. So when you embark on a new project, you should be thinking, how is this going to come out, 5 years from now in terms of is this going to be in the press? Would I want this to be featured by my institution's news office or maybe in a major publication, in the popular press, right? Well, if that's the case, then you should absolutely be thinking about what you can document, what kinds of media you can collect along the way in terms of photos, of lab work, of field work that you may do, and in terms of even the images that you create in different graphics to go along with your research. Because by producing those pieces along the way, you're going to be in a very good position, again, keeping that end in mind. So when you arrive at that point in time, you have all of those pieces together to get the maximum impact from the work that you've done. And that absolutely will help you in the funding process because the funders are going to want to see things nicely packaged up like that at the end. So when you start these efforts, do think about keeping that end in mind. The third habit of highly effective people is put first things first. This is critically important to everything we're doing, really, of course, including funding. And he puts this in the framework here of a quadrant that you may have seen where they consider things as important versus urgent. So if things are important and urgent, then that's something that you have to do, putting out fires, dealing with emergencies. If something is important and not urgent, that's considered quadrant 2, and that's something you need to plan for, and I'll get back to that. If something is not important but urgent, then that's something that you could delegate. And finally, something that's not urgent or not important is something that should really be eliminated. Now, let's go back to quadrant 2. This is what you need to plan for, and these are things that are important but not urgent, and funding definitely falls here. So it requires planning for sure to be successful with funding, and even more so really because some of the funders have moved to rolling deadlines. Now, personally, as my personal opinion, I do support rolling deadlines because it reduces the number of applications coming in, and that's very good in terms of lowering the workload for everybody involved. And it can also indicate, to a funder that you're really serious about an opportunity because you were able to get something submitted without having that external deadline. Absolutely submit or have a deadline in your own mind for yourself, but you're not relying on an external deadline to get that proposal in. So definitely, I would advise you to watch out for the quadrants 3 and 4 in terms of those, encroaching on your time and taking away the time from that you want to be spending in quadrant 2, again, towards your planning type activities. And I want to go a little bit deeper into this now, actually, because it is easy for PIs to think my issue with funding is solely time management, because we are talking about planning. And again, we're talking about those tasks that are important but not urgent. So it absolutely can be the case. And I do know PIs who really do only have a time management issue. They are willing to do all of the steps and comfortable doing all of the steps they need to do to get funded, but they just may not be allowing enough time to prepare what they need to prepare to have it in the best shape possible. Now, however, there are other PIs that when they look a little deeper, it becomes apparent that there actually is also, or maybe even it's a bigger issue, a confidence issue. And they're not confident in reaching out to funders. They don't feel like they know how to, respond, or let's say inquire again, right? For example, if they've sent out an inquiry, they've tried to make contact, they haven't gotten a response. They don't know, well, what to do now. I don't feel comfortable, I feel like I'm going to pester the person, or how many emails should I send? Or they may even avoid reaching out to them at all because they're avoiding having a conversation. Say, what if this person wants to talk to me right now? I'm not really actually ready to talk to them. I would want to have all this stuff prepared, and it's better to just hold off on contacting them until I feel more ready. But you're never going to feel more ready. So you're just going to have to go ahead and do those things. And that goes back to the being proactive. But in any case, I just wanted to take a little bit of time here to encourage you to sort out, do you just have a time management issue? In which case, there's a multitude of resources out there to help you figure out how to block your time, or how to use software for task management or project management, that kind of thing. Those solutions are there. But if the issue is not that, or if it's that plus a hesitation to reach out because of a lack of confidence or other types of avoidant type behavior, then that is worth examining. So, quadrant 2 is, it's a struggle for us all to do as much as we would like to do in that category when there's not a burning deadline that's approaching. But it's worth thinking about if it's really just a time management issue, or if there's more you can do to support yourself there. The fourth habit of highly effective people is think win-win. So win-win is talking about mutually beneficial outcomes. Now, this also is huge in funding. I like to say win-win-win. There can be many more wins. Each win is representing a party, and many people can come together and have a big win, for everybody involved. But here I'd like you to start thinking about the funder, as a person. Now, the funder, we say that broadly, but that actually would include the organization that's providing the funds and whose mission you're supporting with the research that you do, as well as the individual who's managing the process, like, for example, a program officer. Now, there could be more than one individual that's making a decision about funding recommendations. There may be a committee. Of course, there's reviewers involved. But let's just think about that one person who is responsible for managing the process that's going to lead to your proposal being recommended for funding or declined. Now, that person could be a researcher. They could be a professor at a university who's gone on an assignment, or like as a rotator for 1 to 3 years to work at a funding organization. They could be someone who's a federal employee and they've been in that role for many, many years. They could be a federal employee who's newly hired. They could be someone who's an expert in the technical area that you're working in, or someone who doesn't know that much about it at all, or something in between. So for thinking about win-win-win situations, which is what you want to achieve, being the win for you, of course, the win for the organization that's funding the work, and the win for the individual who's managing the process, who's your contact at the funding organization. Now, in order to achieve this, you really are going to benefit by thinking about the person you're interacting with at the funding agency as an individual who has their own career goals, their things that they love about their job, things that are frustrating about their job. Just like anybody else, they're a person, with a career. And so you want to think about how what you are doing can help support that person in their career, which is largely going to be aligned with supporting the agency's mission. You are never wanting to think about you're getting funding as something that is ever going to come to you out of the goodness of someone's heart. You're not a charity case, right? The funding is going to come to you because you are providing a win. Your work is providing a win for another party. So definitely think about how you can make a win for the funders, and that's going to put you in the strongest position. Stephen Covey's fifth habit is seek first to understand and then to be understood. So this has to do with listening, wanting to listen to people, not just get our own ideas out there, but really listen and hear what others are telling us. Of course, super important life skill. Let's talk about it with funding. The thing that comes to me right away, this is the huge, huge, huge thing here, is program officer phone calls. Now, these could be phone calls, Zoom meetings, in-person meetings at a conference or elsewhere. The big thing here is you do not want to talk the entire time or most of the time when you're on these calls. Because if you're talking, the other person is not talking, you're not gathering information. The way you're going to gather information from them is to ask questions. Now, not to make it an interrogation, but you want to ask thoughtful questions to get the information that you need. Now, let's think about this here in terms of a patient going in to see a doctor. Now, imagine if you went to the doctor's office to get some help because you had a problem. Say, for example, you have pain in your back, and you sat down on the table in the examination room, and the doctor comes in and you say, hey, I've got this pain in my back. And they say, okay, here's a brace that I'm going to give you that you need to start wearing. Here are some exercises that you need to do. And here are some medications that I want you to start taking. And they sent you on your way. Now, that would not be the way you would want an exam to go. That's not how doctors behave, right? That doctor is going to ask you things like, when did the pain start? Did you have an accident or a fall? And this is a result of that. Do you have any other symptoms? Do you have any, I'd like to prescribe these medications, but let's see if you have any contraindications with some of these, right? So that is the approach that you should be taking, like you're a doctor, when you go into these conversations. How can you help the funder? How can you help create a win-win-win scenario if you don't even know what problems they're facing? So think about this going into your conversations, and it's very precious time that you have with the funders to have these calls. So make the most of them, and you can do that first by seeking to understand, and then you can come in with your solution, right? So you don't want to come in right away like that doctor in the first example that wasn't a very good doctor that said, I'm going to run these samples, I'm going to use these data, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do, before you've had the chance to hear about what their needs may be. But certainly after you know what their needs are, then it's absolutely appropriate to prescribe a solution, because just like the doctor, you are an expert. The sixth habit of highly effective people or highly effective PIs is synergize. And here we're talking about combining strengths through teamwork. So on one hand, it could seem a little similar on the surface to win-win-win, because you're creating these wins for people, and that's people coming together to achieve something in a sense. But I think of that as more of an administrative types of collaboration or wins. And here, I'd like you to think a little bit more about the technical strengths that people bring. So here, you want to be thinking with a mindset of bringing more people on who can actually help move the work forward. So that would be, what funded or unfunded collaborators can I have on a proposal to outline, exactly to make sure that all of the different areas of expertise are covered that the funders would be looking for. Thinking about including more people and more expertise like that, rather than feeling like, oh, I have to keep this for myself, or being possessive, thinking, it's going to be better if this is just me, right? That's generally not a good approach. Now, even if you are applying for something that's a single PI, like an early career type award, you could have letters of support, letters of collaboration that are coming from people who, because you've built the relationships, have actually worked with you enough before to write those sorts of letters that are strong and indicate that there is going to be a good synergy, a technical synergy. And this could include with government collaborators if that's something that's appropriate. Now, it's important to bring those people on, but also you want to make sure that you explain how you're going to achieve these synergies, because that's easy when you're in your own mind, you're putting all these pieces together for a proposal. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going through your head. You can think on paper, it's clear that this person is bringing this expertise, or here's how the different expertise are going to fit together. But always make sure that you explain that very explicitly so that the reader and the reviewers will all understand that that is something that what you're proposing brings. And this is about bringing something that is going to be greater than the sum of its parts in the end. The seventh habit from Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is sharpen the saw. Now, this one is about renewal. It's about rest and taking care of yourself. And he refers to this in spiritual, mental, physical ways. So here, it's really going to be pretty personal in terms of what you want to do to rest and recharge. I think now more than ever, it's recognized that we all need this, whether you're a PI or in whatever career or occupation you may have. So I think the most helpful thing that I can offer in terms of helping you achieve this is to look for resources and support with all of the other 7 or 6 habits, right, that I just outlined, and the things I touched on there that you should be doing to make your life easier and actually spend less time in the end on these proposals, on the funding process. So everything from, cutting through all the content on PDFs and just getting to a person who can actually ask and they can actually tell you what their priorities are, instead of spending hours and hours reading material, talking to people who've heard things third hand, fourth hand, and trying to figure out a strategy from that. Go to the source, get the information. Another one is using the resources in your university. Now, you're going to have to plan ahead a little, because if you want to get the best support from the experts at your university who are helping you put these proposals together, they need a little lead time. So they support you on short notice. I know that. But it's even better if you can give them more time. They can help you more. So use those resources and get that help to free you up so that you can actually not only have more conversations with program managers, but also do the things that you need to do to rest and to relax and get you in the right mindset to do the things that you need to do. All right, so I hope that you have enjoyed hearing about Stephen Covey's 7 habits in terms of the funding process. So I'm going to review them right here, and I want to make a final point. Now, the habits are: number 1, be proactive; 2, begin with the end in mind; 3, put first things first; 4, think win-win-win; 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood; 6 is synergize; and 7 is sharpen the saw. So as I said at the beginning, the first 3, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and put first things first, are really personal habits that we can use to manage ourselves. And the next 3, win-win-win, seek first to understand, and synergize, are those public-facing habits or related to how we deal with the outside world. Now, Stephen Covey went a step further and put this into, I think, a very helpful context, which takes you through the levels of maturity of a person, and not like saying some people are immature, but really just the levels of personal and professional development that we all go through. The first one is dependency. So this is when you're a child or early student and you're dependent on others to tell you what to do and to give you what you need. Now we're all out of that stage, so that's good. The next one, and this deals with these first 3, again, the personal habits, has to do with having you achieve independence. So an independent researcher is what you are. You've gone out on your own. You're doing independent research. You're guiding your research. You're forming a team and you're leading a team. So most PIs are pretty comfortable here in this independent stage. But the next stage, which again deals with those 4, 5, and 6 habits, is interdependence. And this is what you want to achieve. And when you achieve this, you are going to have great success with funding. So remember, I said people aren't going to give you funding because they feel bad for you or because it's your turn to get funding. they're going to give you funding because you're helping them in a win-win-win situation. You're going to get funding because you are able to understand the needs that an organization has, and you're able to work synergistically with others to achieve really great and impactful results. So getting from this independent researcher stage into the stage of interdependence is absolutely what you want to do. And this is what's going to propel you into that mid-career level and into really being like a senior person in your field, in terms of, even if you're still at a fairly young age, you can still be absolutely taking a leadership role in your community and leading research, leading ideas, and leading people. And you're going to do that not just as an island, independence, but you're going to do that when you're in this state of interdependence. So that's my take on Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People through the lens of the funding process to help researchers here in the United States have success with the research funding process. Once again, if you want to hear more tips like these, go ahead on LinkedIn, check that bell icon right at the top right part of my profile page, because that's going to let you get alerted every time that I make a post, which these posts are about having success with the research funding process. So I think you'll find them useful. And if you don't do that, then you may miss some of the information. I have also combined all these tips together, and they're over in one recording over on YouTube. So check that out as well.